that mean in English? It means they decide on the costs, how deep they're going to be, and when they're coming in. Now, the Irish Independent had a very good story recently, which showed that the IMF and the EU Commission hate the idea of free travel for pensioners on trains and buses. And it says this is top of the list to get rid of that. So if Ireland misses any of the targets, first thing they will do is to say, right, end free travel on the trains and buses for pensioners, get rid of that. Or else they'll say, up the water charges or up the property charges. They get to decide the size of the actual cutbacks. Now, I've just given you the simple version. That's what the treaty's about. As simple as that. Balanced budgets. You've got to cut your deficit. Cut your overall debt over 20 years. And if you're not a good boy and girl, you get fined, or else the EU take control of your economy. That's the simple version of the treaty. Now we've got to throw in the complicated one. And I heard actually on the radio today, the referendum commission tried to summarise this in a few minutes. So I'll just try to go over it. I forgot to mention the word structural deficit, right? Now, what is a structural deficit? I'll give you the definition first of all, and then I'll tell you some of the problems with it. The structural deficit means the gap between the taxes the government takes in and its spending. That's easy enough to understand. Taking into account, this is where it gets more difficult, where we are at on the business cycle. In other words, are we in a boom or a slump, and taking into account exceptional conditions. And you arrive at a figure. Now, the first thing is, how are they going to know whether we're going to be in a boom or a slump? I mean, none of these economists predicted the crash. So how are they going to work out what the figure is when they didn't predicted the Ireland would crash in 2007? And the answer is they don't know. And any of them that are honest will tell you straight, the structural deficit is a very controversial issue. In fact, let's go to the real authorities now, the Bundesbank. This is what the Bundesbank writes down. It says, the structural deficit is relatively complex, okay, just going to try and explain it, opaque, dark, this is a beauty, elastic on account of the numerous discretionary modelling options. That means you'll get different results depending on how you measure it. Discretionary means how you choose to measure it. So therefore, they don't know exactly what they're talking about. But the point is, they're proposing to put this into our constitution. And none of them know what they're on about. And as an example, the IMF looked at Ireland in 2007. It looked at Ireland in 2007 and said, Ireland is fine, structural deficit on the plus side was actually plus 0.7% of the figure. 2 years afterwards, they went back and looked at it and said, sorry, it's actually minus 8.7. So how could a body which says it knows all these things get such a discrepancy? But remember, that's what we're putting into the Constitution. Now, there's a very simple way of explaining this treaty. It's just we're going to work hard to pay for the bankers. That's what this is really about. And you've got to keep it simple when people have been so bamboozled with economics in this country. Now, why do I say that? I should explain that briefly. We live in a country where 90 billion has been robbed off the people of Ireland to be put into banks. And they call it, when you rob, you don't say rob, you say recapitalisation. We recapitalise the banks because we're robbing the taxpayer. That has happened right across Europe. But you may not be aware of another scam that has been going on in Europe really since the beginning of this year, which is called the Long-Term refinancing operation. And this is a system whereby the European Central Bank has given out 1.1 trillion euros, that's a hell of a lot of money, to the banks as a loan where they only have to pay back 1% interest each year. So it's a very low interest we paid. They take that money and then it's called the carryover trade. They carry it over and buy government bonds where the interest rate is 6%. If you put your money into a Spanish government bond at the moment, it'll give you 6% a year. But you've just got the loan for 1%. So you pocket the difference and you've got billions. So this is how the banks in Europe are being subsidised by the European Union. But let's say now you're a banker and you wake up in the dead of night and you're fretting a bit and you're worrying. Well, what are you worrying about? What you've got to worry about is I've got the money, that makes me happy. But I'm worrying about, will the Spaniards or the Irish or the Italians pay me back my money? Because I put my money into their bonds and I have to squeeze them to get the money off me. And the reality is, they may not pay me. And one thing that's really terrifying me is what happened in Greece. In Greece, because the people were in rebellion, the Greek government wrote down 70% of the bonds. So there was a banker will only get back 30 cents in the euro for each bond. They're terrified of this. And what they want to do, therefore, is they want to lock down the people of Europe so that we cannot spend our taxes on schools, hospitals, and what's useful, and therefore the money is left over to make sure we pay the banks, the bondholders. And that's what this treaty is about. It's about making sure that people do not have a democratic right to spend money as we choose, but keep the money safe for the bankers. Now, what all this is going to do is it's going to rob the people of Europe of any chance of, if you like, making a proper recovery. And it's a bit like what happened in America in the 1930s. In the 1930s, the Wall Street crash, 1929. First president was a man called Herbert Hoover, who believed completely in balanced budgets, never spent anything, just cut back on social welfare, cut back on wages. Results, America kept going deeper and deeper into recession, and Herbert Hoover is famous for giving his names to Hoovervilles, which were shanty towns built on the edges of American cities because people were so impoverished by what happened in the recession. And it took Roosevelt, I'm not saying I agree with him, everything he said, but it's just fact, to start spending money on parks, bridges, public works to get America out of recession. Then it went back into recession afterwards in terms of war. But at least it began to shift around. So this is exactly the same as what's happening at the moment in Ireland. I'm going to skip that. Okay, now, why then should we vote against the treaty? Really three main reasons. We cannot take any more cutbacks in this country. This country is suffering. Young people are emigrating in vast numbers. It's shocking what's really happening in the country. And the idea of 20 more years of cutbacks is just unbelievable. Unbelievable. But as soon as you vote for this, the politicians will say, our hands are tied. That's what they always want to say, that. Our hands are tied, not us. We can't do anything about it. You voted for the law and you're stuck with it for 20 years of cutbacks. One reason why we should vote against it. The second reason is, why should Ireland pay off this debt according to a timescale that's laid down by the EU? I mean, if you look at the pattern, I mean, first of all, the debt, they told us to bail out the banks. The ECB told us to bail out the banks to save the European banks. But then, they're now telling us we must pay off the whole thing in 20 years. But look at the other countries. Britain didn't pay off its Second World War debt until 2006. Germany, which is now lecturing everybody else about debts, did not pay off its First World War debt. First World War, if my memory is right, ended in 1918. They didn't pay off their debt till nearly 100 years afterwards in 2010. So what's the rush for Ireland? Why are we racing to pay off debt in 20 years when these countries took, in some cases, 90 or 50 years? And the third reason is we have to invest in Ireland. We really do have to invest. And really, I mean, it really is shocking when you think about it that in 1927, in a poverty-stricken country where people were going around without shoes on their feet, a right-wing government, extreme right-wing government, Common Gael government, started to build the Ard na Crusha power station, which eventually electrified rural Ireland. And here we are in 2012, and the government's saying to us, we can't invest in major projects. And one of the things that's needed in Ireland, it's badly needed in Ireland, more made reference to it, is that we are highly dependent on fossil fuel. Ireland, about 61% of all energy used in Ireland, electricity, everything, comes from fossil fuel. You all know the price of petrol, it's going up all the time. We can't be reliant on foreign fuel. I mean, obviously we need to take the natural resources off the coast of Mayo into public ownership, but